Okay, team, we have 12 o'clock. I think we should get started. Fabio, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you see that, team? Great.
Hey, Mike, you are in presenter mode.
Okay. And what does that mean exactly?
We can see the main slide plus the next slide and the notes.
Okay. I'm not sure how to change that setting.
If you go back to Zoom and pick share screen, and then you can pick one of the other options. So you can select the PowerPoint output instead of sharing your desktop.
I'm not sure where to do that. Let's see. So maybe I should unshare and try that again. Okay. Try this one more time. Did that work, Fabio?
Yes.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. Okay. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your patience. We're all still learning in this virtual environment. My name is Michael Kennison. I'm with the Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement Office. And I just want to thank everybody for making the time today to come out and share your perspectives on the Community Safety Initiative. We appreciate hearing from you around public safety and policing in our community, and our city council appreciates you sharing your perspectives on these issues, and it will be helpful to them to hear your perspectives as they make some decisions on the future direction of the Community Safety Initiative. I'm joined today with three colleagues, Kevin Altucker, who's a project manager for the Community Safety Initiative, Laura Hammond, our city's Community Relations Director, and Fabio Andrade with the Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement Office. The goal of today's listening session is to gather your opinions and perceptions about the Community Safety Initiative, or what we refer to as the CSI. Our conversation today is limited to the CSI and its funding as directed by City Council. You're going to get much more background on the components of our community safety system and the Community Safety Initiative in a moment, so I'm not going to go into detail on those right now. But it is important that you understand some context for today's meeting in our current process. This gives you a view of our timeline. In July of last year, in the wake of the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Council heard from community about the safety concerns of folks that identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and initiated a process to get feedback from representatives of those communities on changes or additions to the Community Safety Initiative that would best respond to the needs of their communities. Focus group sessions were held last December to get that input. Council also directed staff to incorporate opportunities for the general public to provide feedback, since it's been some time since we had gone out to get and engage the community around the Community Safety Initiative. Today's listening session, as well as a community survey that we'll tell you more about here in a moment, were developed for that purpose. Our agenda for today, in a moment, we're going to start with viewing a webinar that will provide you a baseline understanding of the different components of our community safety system, the gaps in services that have been identified where the city is challenged to meet demand, and the strategies being proposed to fill those gaps. You'll gain an understanding of the payroll tax that funds the plan, what we refer to as the Community Safety Initiative, and how those dollars are proposed to be used. There are a number of options for you to participate today. You're welcome to just listen anonymously. You can sign up to speak. And a third option is to complete a short survey to provide written comments if that is your preference. You could also feel free to speak and to submit comments today. So let's talk a little bit about kind of how this will work logistically. The first thing I want to emphasize is that our primary purpose today is just to gather information. It's to listen and to record your perspective on the Community Safety Initiative. We're not prepared to answer detailed questions related to different services or aspects of the payroll tax. We really want to focus our time on capturing your thoughts, concerns, and ideas so we can share that information with City Council. However, if you're having a technical problem or a question, you have a question about process, you can submit those via the Q&A function on your screen, and someone will address it. We are recording today's meeting, and it will be posted on the Community Safety Initiative webpage. We also have a third-party service providing a written transcription of today's session. The recording and transcription will make sure we have an accurate record and assist in analyzing and reporting on the feedback that we receive. For those of you joining on a computer or a tablet, if you wish to speak today, you can use the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be added to a queue. If you're joining by phone today, you can indicate that you'd like to be a speaker by pressing *9. Each speaker will have 2.5 minutes to respond. And when called upon, we ask that you unmute yourself and begin speaking. For those on the phone, you can press #6 to unmute yourself. A timer on the screen will monitor your time, and when the yellow light is lit, you have 15 seconds remaining. If you're on the phone, you won't be able to see the timer, but please be warned that you'll be muted after 2.5 minutes. Our meeting is scheduled to go until 2 o'clock. However, we're committed to letting all those that want to speak the opportunity to do so. And so if we need to stay longer, we're committed to doing that today. If we get through everyone that wants the opportunity to speak in the first round and we still have time remaining, we'll open a second round. We do ask that you only raise your hand to speak once during the first round in order to leave time for others to speak. If you prefer to provide your feedback in writing, there is a link in the chat to a short survey that asks you to respond to the same questions that we'll be asking speakers to respond to. Those written responses will become part of the record and shared with council. In terms of next steps, we have a second listening session scheduled for 6 o'clock next Tuesday, the 30th. And you're welcome to attend that meeting as well. You can submit additional feedback through the end of March via an online survey at our CSI engagement webpage. That survey is a much more extensive survey than the short one that we're asking you to fill out today if you would like. So you're encouraged also to go out there and complete that survey as well. And it is open through March. And then in May, we are scheduled to report back to council and provide a summary of all the feedback we've heard through the focus groups, the survey, and these listening sessions as well. Before we open the webinar, we want to leave you with these questions, and we're asking you to respond to those when you're speaking or in your written comments. And those are, what are your impressions of the City of Eugene community safety system as presented in the webinar? Are there other gaps in the community safety system that weren't identified in the webinar? Do you believe the identified strategies address the gaps in the community safety system? And finally, would you change the proposed allocation of funds that would be used to pay for the community safety initiative? And with that, I'm going to stop sharing And I think I'll ask Fabio to start the webinar.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mayor Lucy Venice, and I want to thank you for taking the time to learn about the Community Safety Initiative, or CSI, and share with us your thoughts about how it can best meet the safety needs of our community. We are in a unique and pivotal time in our country. The killing of George Floyd sparked protest, reflection, and many conversations about policing and safety. If you identify as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, this topic is front and center for you and those you care about. I understand these conversations are not easy and take an emotional toll. So thank you for being willing to be here and invest time and emotional energy to participate in this process. Near the end of the last budget cycle, City Council heard from many community members about the desire to reevaluate how we prioritize spending on policing and community safety. Council responded by initiating a process to get feedback from communities of color on potential changes or addition to the CSI. The CSI provides us an opportunity to start this process of adapting spending on policing and safety to community needs and desires. It has been a couple of years since we asked our community to engage in conversations about the CSI. Those conversations happened before this pandemic, and the protests against racism shifted the national dialogue. Council wants to know if our community's perspectives on public safety and spending of CSI funds have shifted. And for that reason, we are providing opportunities for the entire community to lend their perspectives too. I want to be clear about what you are being asked to do. The focus of this process is on the Community Safety Initiative, the CSI. As you will learn, we will begin collecting a payroll tax in January, and this funding is dedicated to addressing community safety needs. These are new dollars. They are not related to the city's general fund budget that pays for many city services, including police. We're asking for your input on how to use this new revenue source consistent with how the ordinance allows for those dollars to be used. We want to respect and use your time wisely, so clarifying the scope of what you are being asked to look at and provide feedback on is important. Council has also convened an ad hoc committee to look at policy changes on policing and safety, and that work is ongoing. The CSI and ad hoc committee processes are separate conversations at this time. As you will learn, the CSI is an attempt to address some gaps in services that have gone unaddressed for years related to our police, fire, and emergency medical services, prevention services, municipal court processes, and the needs of those that are homeless. The CSI is intended to address gaps in the system that are impacting our community every day. It was designed to look at the entire system, not just police or public safety services alone, in order to help connect people to services and improve quality of life by preventing problems earlier. The purpose of this webinar is for everyone to better understand the CSI, including how payroll tax funds can be used, desired outcomes we have identified, important community safety challenges we are facing, current strategies proposed to address them, and how you can add your perspectives to the conversation. How do you think the CSI can best respond to our community safety needs? This webinar will explain the CSI and help you be ready to engage in more discussion and be able to share an informed perspective. Thank you again for your participation. I look forward to hearing your perspectives as we work together to craft a community safety system that is responsive to our evolving community needs.
Welcome to an overview of Eugene's Community Safety Initiative. My name is Kevin Altucker, and I've served as the project manager for the Community Safety Initiative for the past several years. I'm excited to be here today to share information about the initiative and appreciate your time. When we think about the traditional justice system, Most people think of police, attorneys, court, and even the jail. Within Eugene, these services include the Eugene Police Department, the City Prosecutor's Office, and the Eugene Municipal Court. However, when we talk about a community safety system, we are including programs and services in addition to the traditional justice system. This more holistic approach to public safety includes prevention services, social services, and alternative resolution programs. It's a system that moves away from a one-size-fits-all approach. The city and our community partners make up this system that works together to improve safety, reduce the cycle of crime, and improve community members' quality of life. The City of Eugene's Community Safety Initiative is based on this system and includes police, fire, emergency medical services, 911, municipal court, prevention, and homeless services, as well as community programs that work together. When the Community Safety Initiative was being developed in 2018 and 2019, the Eugene City Council approved a set of desired outcomes they wanted to achieve. These outcomes were based on information about identified needs and gaps in services, as well as input from the community and other best practices, including recommendations from 21st century policing. The outcomes included building trust, increasing safety, focusing on prevention, and strengthening partnerships. Within each of those outcomes, there were also more specific measures, including things like resolving cases more quickly, reducing response time, enhancing staff training, and increasing services for community members. In order to fund the initiative, in June 2019, the Eugene City Council passed the Community Safety Payroll Tax Ordinance. The ordinance authorized a payroll tax to provide funds for community safety services, including police, fire and emergency medical services, municipal court and prosecution services, prevention and homeless services. These are the services included in the Community Safety Initiative. Both the City Code and the City Charter limit the use of the payroll tax revenue to funding these specific services. There is flexibility in how the payroll tax funds are distributed among these services. The distribution is not prescribed by either code or charter. This is an important point as you think about what our community safety needs are and how best to address them. Both Eugene employers and employees working in Eugene will pay the tax starting January 1st, 2021. The amount of tax owed by each differs. Generally, employers and self-employed persons with a physical address in Eugene will pay a tax rate of 0.0021. That's 0.21 of 1% of the wages paid by the employer. Employers with 2 or less employees pay a slightly lower rate. Employees working at employers located in Eugene are divided into 3 groups. Employees making minimum wage pay no payroll tax. Employees making between minimum wage and $15 per hour will pay a tax rate of 0.003 on their earnings. For a full-time employee earning $15 an hour, this equates to a tax of $7.80 per month or $94 per year. Employees making over $15 an hour will pay a tax of 0.0044 or 44 cents for every $100 earned. For a full-time employee earning $20 an hour, this would be $15.25 per month or $183 per year. The payroll tax rates were forecasted to generate approximately $23.6 million of new revenue per year. This was identified as the amount needed to make some of the systematic changes that could improve the city's community safety system. We'll talk about what specific programs and strategies those dollars could be spent on in a moment. We also know that there may be some changes to the amount the community safety payroll tax will generate and how long it will take to reach that $23.6 million. The impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on businesses and the community, as well as how quickly our economy is able to recover, will affect how much money the payroll tax generates for community safety services. While we don't know the specific impacts yet, we are monitoring this closely to be able to provide a better estimate of how much the payroll tax may generate. The estimated $23.6 million per year was based on a specific package of community safety services that roughly provided 65% for police services, 10% for fire and emergency medical services, 15% for municipal court and prosecution services, and 10% for prevention and homeless services. Even though the tax rates were based on the desire to generate $23.6 million, and that amount was based on a specific package of community safety services, the City Council does not have to distribute the funds in the same way as shown here. As previously mentioned, the funds do have to be spent in these service areas, but the distribution can change. One important thing to know is that the city has already invested approximately $8 million in some of these services as gap funding before the payroll tax would start to be collected. These funds have gone into prevention services, including services that support at-risk youth, continuation of the community court program that connects nonviolent offenders cited in downtown Eugene with social service providers, public safety services, including adding 10 patrol officers to create a citywide street crimes unit, adding 5 community service officers who can respond to non-emergency calls for service, adding 4 staff to the 911 call center, expanding jail services by 10 beds, funding for the ambulance transport gap coverage, and funding municipal court and city prosecutor services to meet growing needs. Homeless services, including a year-round dusk to dawn safe sleeping program, ongoing support for programs serving people experiencing homelessness, including the Lindholm Center, the car camping program, and the Rest Stop program. Funding for 15th Night, a program to reduce youth homelessness, and a homeless services coordinator within the city. The current plan is to use a portion of community safety funds to pay for these services. If it were determined to not use community safety funds for these services, there is no other identified ongoing source of funding. There are a couple of oversight mechanisms in place to ensure that the community safety funds are properly spent. Community safety funds are placed in a separate account specifically for community safety services, so they can be easily tracked and monitored. Each year, an outside auditor will prepare a report on whether the community safety funds were used to increase funding to the 4 categories of community safety services previously discussed. Separately, a citizen advisory board will also generate an annual report documenting the city's use of the community safety funds. A city charter amendment passed by the voters in 2019 caps the payroll tax rate for community safety funds, so that can't change without a public vote. After reviewing the comprehensive report and receiving public testimony, no later than June 30th, 2027, the City Council must decide whether to refer the payroll tax to the voters or let it expire. If the Council decides not to refer it to the voters, or the voters choose not to continue the payroll tax, the tax will end after December 31st, 2028. In 2027, the Citizen Advisory Board must conduct a comprehensive review of the city's community safety system and use of the payroll tax revenues and prepare a report. The Citizen Advisory Board's report must include an analysis of the economic impacts of the payroll tax on businesses in the city and an analysis of the progress made towards achieving 3 specific outcomes. Number 1, increase the number of minutes per hour officers are available for community policing. Number 2, reduce the number of calls for service per day to which no city personnel are dispatched to respond. And number 3, reduce the number of minutes it takes city personnel to respond to non-emergency requests for service. For context, in 2019, officers were available only 5 minutes of every hour for community policing, and there were approximately 80 calls for service per day that received no dispatch response. And it took an average of 42 minutes to respond to non-emergency requests for service. Now that we've covered the broader idea of the community safety system and understand what is allowable under the ordinance, Let's look more specifically at the currently identified problems and needs that compelled the City Council to start the Community Safety Initiative. At its core, the problem the Community Safety Initiative is trying to solve is that our community safety needs are growing faster than our resources to address those needs. That's creating some critical gaps that impacts people every day. Some of those impacts may be more visible than others. The next several slides provide some examples of gaps for different service areas and potential strategies to address them. The municipal court has a backlog of cases due to staffing shortages and growing demand, and that means it takes more time for people to have their cases heard and resolved. Some people cycle through the court over and over again with repeated offenses. Clearly, there's a need for paths out of the justice system to reduce the number of people who repeatedly return to court again and again without getting the help they need. Meanwhile, there's a lack of stable funding for promising alternatives or paths out of the court system, and many times these programs only have short-term funding, which is not sustainable. Limited jail capacity means that people are released early, and that doesn't keep people accountable for their crimes. Example strategies to address these needs for the municipal court include adding staff to the court and city prosecutor's office, providing stable, ongoing funding to keep and expand programs like community court and the mental health court. These alternative courts help divert people from the criminal justice system and connect them with services that reduce the likelihood that they will reoffend. Adding capacity so that more cases can be heard. The municipal court has already added the ability to provide virtual court appearances, and with additional funding could open another courtroom to help move cases forward more quickly. Funding for additional jail beds and attorneys for people who may not be able to afford one. In our police department, critical gaps are indicated by the fact that the number of calls for service increased more than 30% over the last several years, but the number of staff available to respond to those calls remained the same. As a result, police were not able to respond to 1 out of 3 non-emergency calls for service, an average of about 80 calls a day. The high demand on officers' time also means that they have less time to be out in the community building relationships, which is foundational to their goal of building trust with the community. Example strategies to address these issues include add staff to answer and respond to calls within our police and 911 dispatch center. Add community service officers who are not sworn police officers but can respond to non-emergency calls for service. Add a social worker and additional support for homelessness outreach on police teams. Add detectives, evidence control staff, and a forensic analyst to help investigate more crimes and resolve them more quickly. Add administrative and record support staff to help support the increased workload across the department. Within Eugene Springfield Fire, which also provides emergency medical services, 2 important needs include the funding gap for our ambulance services, which cost more to provide each year because of rising costs and limits to amounts available for reimbursement for services provided. More efficient ways to respond to non-life-threatening calls. For example, when a full fire truck and advanced life support ambulance responds to a call for service that doesn't require an advanced level of care, it is expensive and means those resources may not be available or may be delayed when someone does need more advanced life-saving care. In addition to filling the gap in funding for ambulance services, example strategies for fire and emergency medical services include a call center triage program that would connect non-emergency callers with resources that could make sure they get the help they need, such as a community response unit. The community response unit would be a smaller vehicle that could respond quickly to calls for service and determine if more advanced care was needed. The goal is to connect the community member needs with the right level and type of service. The impacts of homelessness are felt across Eugene. Data shows that the number of people experiencing homelessness is growing. Compared to other cities across the nation, a higher percentage of our homeless population is unsheltered and living in a place not meant for human habitation, such as cars, parks, sidewalks, and on the street. Gaps in emergency shelter resources, like shelter beds, especially for single adults who account for the majority of those experiencing homelessness. Between July and September of 2020, 3,823 people experiencing homelessness accessed services in Lane County. Approximately 75% of those people live in Eugene. This total number includes more than 1,800 people with disabilities and more than 1,300 chronically homeless individuals. Example strategies for homeless services include increasing the number of alternative shelters. Alternative shelters include programs like our overnight parking program that provides safe, legal places for unhoused people to sleep in their vehicles. The Rest Stop program that allows up to 20 people to sleep overnight in tents or Conestoga huts on designated sites with support services. And the new Microsites program that designates areas for up to 6 Conestoga huts or tents and is managed by a nonprofit social service provider. Working with the local organization called 15th Night to reduce youth homelessness. Creating a resource center where unhoused individuals meet on site with social service providers and get access to the help they need. Increasing the hours that the Eugene Service Station is open. The service station is a place where people can meet their basic needs, get food, do laundry, and take showers, and funding a position in the city to work with community partners and help coordinate these services. In addition to these service areas, the Community Safety Initiative also includes prevention efforts. The prevention team has already hired a youth inclusion specialist who trains staff and works with youth who are challenged, both emotionally and behaviorally, to find effective strategies for those youth to be successful in educational and social environments. Another planned strategy includes launching expanded out-of-school programming designed to promote personal growth and development with a focus on communication, problem solving, decision-making, healthy relationships, and connection to community. This work also focuses on building new partnerships and joint programming for youth in the community who are marginalized. Working with organizations and groups affiliated with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color is an emphasis. This webinar was the first step in the process, and there are a number of other opportunities to participate and provide input into the Community Safety Initiative, including a series of focus groups for organizations representing Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, virtual public meetings open to the general public, an online survey for those that live or work in the city of Eugene. At the end of our process, a report summarizing the feedback received through the focus groups, public meetings, and survey will be presented to City Council by the end of February 2021. City Council will use this information to inform future decisions regarding the allocation of funds for the Community Safety Initiative. If you want updates and more information, go to the Community Safety Initiative webpage. The webpage outlines the process and timeline. We'll include a link to the survey, some key dates, and information on how to access public meetings, the summary report, and other items prepared for City Council. The web address is on the bottom of this slide. Thank you to everyone who's taken the time to provide input into the future direction of the Community Safety Initiative. It is important that City Council understands the community's perspective as we work towards building a community safety system that balances multiple needs related to policing, fire and emergency medical services,
Okay. Thank you everybody for being patient and watching the webinar with us. I know that's a lot of information, but it's a complex initiative, and we feel it really important that everyone has kind of a same baseline of understanding before we enter into the comment phase. I'd like to, before we open the floor, you can start adding yourself to the queue now. I'd like to draw your attention to the chat. And in the chat, the first message in the chat includes at the top a link to the community safety survey that we mentioned that's open through March. The second link is a link to allow you to provide your responses to questions today that are being presented. And then finally, below that, we've just posted kind of the 4 framing questions for today that we would like to hear your perspective on. With that, I think we'll open the floor, and I believe Kevin's going to manage the queue.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I will attempt to manage the queue. So the process will be, I will announce the first person in the queue with the name of the following person. And we already have a number of folks raising their hand, which is great. So our first speaker today will be initials KAM. And you're now allowed to comment. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello, my name is Cam. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Go ahead.
I was just on here to comment my disapproval with the amount of money that is going to the EPD. I feel like they already have enough money, and we need to be transferring that to our fire departments because we know what happened last year. We know there was wildfires, and they will come again. So I just want to see that money be given to our firefighters, more homeless efforts, and not to the police or the judicial system in any type of way. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam. Our next speaker will be Gracie Schatz, followed by initials ZZ. So Gracie, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name's Gracie Schatz. I live in Ward 7. And this summer, I started a petition to defund the police department and allocate 20% of their budget to cahoots. Over 15,000 people signed that petition. So I would like to speak on behalf of those in saying that our police department does not need any more money, and they do not protect everyone in our community. They do not make everyone in our community feel safe. In fact, they have murdered people in our community, including Elaborio Rodriguez Jr. So I believe that this money, this tax money that we did not vote on in the first place, should be used for prevention and homeless services. The police chief himself, Chief Skinner, presented to the council that they don't want to be dealing with the homeless population in this town. And I believe that they shouldn't. I think that we should have another call line, and not just 911, but another number that we can call as civilians to request help from a non-police entity, whether that be cahoots or this other like quick action, small vehicle response team that you were speaking about. I think we need to have the ability to call for help that we feel safe calling, and that prevention and homeless services should be prioritized. So yeah, that's my bit. Thank you.
Gracie, thank you. Our next speaker will be initials ZZ, followed by Matthew Uke. ZZ, go ahead. We can't hear you, ZZ. You may be muted.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much. First, I just want to begin by saying that I am extremely angry, and I'm also traumatized in a broad way and acutely by the police in this town. I could name specific officers, and I've interacted with the police chief myself, and it deserves its own attention. But I want to start with that so you know where I'm coming from as I speak. First of all, I will say that that context you provided does not speak well, because if you look at what the police chief says, or what you have then repeated about 80 non-emergency calls a day not being responded to, or the police chief gives an example saying that someone is traumatized if they've gone away on vacation and their house is robbed, and then they're secondarily traumatized because they call the police and the police don't make it out till the next day. Okay, those are not the deep traumas in this town. Okay, property owners that are going on vacation and they get their stuff robbed, I understand that's a very unsettling experience. However, that is not the deep life-threatening traumas that are going on in the thousands every day in this town, and that is the context we need to be dealing with. I have to say, I'm highly skeptical about this process, given that, you know what, when the CSI process started, the largest there were polls and surveys done then. You got the feedback. 40% of respondents said that was the largest category of response, said they wanted an address for of homelessness, and only 4% mentioned public safety. Traffic congestion got a higher level of concern than public safety. And so it is very, you talk about building trust, and yet look at the process we've had. We have been over and over and over again. And Dr. Gary Mann Ross, he said to council, one thing you can't do, this is so unprecedented, you can't not take it to the voters. Well, you know what? Taxpayers paid for that advice and they overrode that. So you can hear my anger, you can hear my skepticism. Defund the police. There were 2 homicides in 2019, and the police killed 3 people: Charlie Landeros, Michael Amador Sanchez, and Eli Borio Rodriguez, all people of color. The police do not make us safer. And
Thank you, ZZ. Your time is finished. Our next speaker will be Matthew Uke, followed by Nicolaj. Matthew, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Right on. Hi, my name's Matthew Uke, resident of Ward 4. And a few concerns, of course. The fact, as has been mentioned, that this payroll tax was passed through a city council resolution to try to get 65% of whatever it was to go to a criminal justice system that has not been serving justice. And wondering about what it criminalizes is something I really hoped would come to light with more of the accolades that Cahoots is getting, for instance. And so getting a breakdown of what those specific calls are and how they could specifically be addressed instead of just clumping them together in X amount of, is it crime? Is it assault? Like, hopefully there's probably a like ranking level almost that dispatchers take care of. And so making sure that dispatching is done properly, right? Like getting another service besides 911 to respond to stuff that's a non-crisis emergency, I think is a great step to take the idea away from more police make us safer, because spending $561,300, over $500,000 to hire one officer in 2019, it seems like with our limited resources, we could be doing more to actually address why people are feeling like they need to call the police, right? And so, it's great that trying to get more representation of folks in the current system, so that way there's a little more empathy that can be built initially, as a place to put this, right? But like, the current system doesn't work. And so just slowly adding more pieces to it that won't significantly change where we need to allocate like $500,000 for one person for 1 year. That is a lot of money, y'all. That could, shelters, like we need more shelters. We have vacant storefronts, right? If we're trying to make the community more safe by making sure that everyone feels belonged and has a safe place to go, putting some of this money towards those ideas that take it out of, well, safety is more police, which I commend y'all for doing with this and adopting it, with that idea in mind. But I don't see the current funding allocation and how much resource we already put in to the EPD budget being the best.
Thank you, Matthew. Your time is up. Our next speaker in the queue is Nicolaj. And Nicolaj is the last speaker that has indicated with their hand up. If others wish to speak, click on your virtual hand and I'll put you in the queue. So Nicolaj, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Nikolai Birdman, and I would like to speak on everything I have observed throughout the protests throughout the past year. I think the police is severely overfunded, and when they are given more funds than they actually need, they will be using unnecessary force on citizens that they are supposed to protect. I've just seen some awful things. You know, the news just came out about the Thurston protests, and the police being quoted as just saying some really awful things about and racially motivated comments about the protesters for Black Lives Matter. I think it is just it's been proven to be completely ineffective. They've been working against the people, and I don't think that that's what the Eugene community needs right now, not just for BIPOC, but for the entire community. And that includes homeless people that desperately need the services to be connected to services that they need, housing, food, just all of those things. And it's kind of absurd that we have such a huge budget and we are putting it all into the police force when we have so many other community needs that could really actually build the community that we need, instead of using the police as a Band-Aid and in fact making the situation worse.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Max Rink, followed by Marty Wilder. So Max, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. My name's Max. I am a resident of Ward 3. I'm a homeowner in Ward 3. I'll start out by saying, to answer that question of all these different categories of allocation, I want to strongly support that the 80% that is currently earmarked for policing, incarceration, and enforcement, that needs to be redirected to prevention and homeless services. I think I have direct experience of housing, people who have either been homeless or at risk of homelessness, and there is nothing that a police officer or a judge or a prison warden could do to help those people. What they need is housing. They need housing and they need social services desperately. As far as BIPOC people are concerned, previous speakers have alluded to the 3 BIPOC people who were killed by EPD in the last couple of years. And police killing and brutality is a reality in our community, and giving the police more money will not solve that. Policing and prisons are not going to be a solution to homelessness. They're not going to be a solution to hate crimes. And they're not going to be a solution to police violence. Yeah, that's my piece. I agree with everyone else who has spoken up for reallocating that money to housing and social services. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Let's see. Marty Wilder is up now, followed by Judith. Oops. Sorry, Judith, I have just clicked in the wrong place. Hang on. Marty, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Yes, in addition to everything I'm hearing, it seems to be overwhelming opinion among the community members here that we don't need to add more funding to EPD. But I'd like to speak directly to funding for Cahoots. During this process, I've been told in numerous ways that Cahoots gets funded through EPD, so that's a different conversation, and that's not a conversation to be having here, which doesn't make any sense to me. Cahoots should continue to be funded as it is through EPD because they relieve EPD of calls. They're meeting some of the goals that you've posted here in terms of reducing response times and the minutes that it takes and the number of responses that police can do, because we need to be sending less of those calls to the police. We need to send more of them to Cahoots and organizations like Cahoots. And while this organization that we have for 30 years here is now being touted across the country as a model, we haven't been funding it enough. They only have 2 vans out at a time. we should be taking that money. If we could double that capacity and have 4 vans out, if we could pay them more livable wages and give them benefits, then we could be addressing all of this directly. So I think that we should continue to pay them through EPD and use CSI funds to really increase the capacity of Cahoots to meet these goals that you're trying to set here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Our next speaker will be Judith, and Judith currently is the last speaker that has the hand up. So Judith, go ahead.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you for the time today to allow to share some opinions. I agree with a lot of what's been said today. It seems like that's kind of the feeling across the board is there's just too much funding for police department at this point with not enough results. We know that it's not helping combat one of the biggest issues that we have, which is homelessness. It's inevitable. You drive around this town and it is just a shame to see how many individuals are unhoused. We all know how unhappy everyone is. There is no one that is happy with the state of Eugene when it comes to safety and homelessness at this point. We have funded Eugene PD over and over, and we don't see any improvement in this. So it's just, we cannot continue down that path when we know that it does not work. I agree with funding Cahoots, and I agree it's across the country. People are saying what a great program it is. And living here and knowing the reality that we barely give it any funds at all is just such a shame. It is such a good program. People are looking at it across the country, and we really need to give the funding that's appropriate to that so that they can continue to grow. That's what it's just, we don't bat an eye. Year after year, we say, hey, let's cut funding to education. Let's cut funding here because we need to. And no one feels like that's radical to defund schools or defund other programs that are vital to us. But when it comes to defunding the police, it becomes such a radical thing to say, and people get so defensive for it. But if we're willing to do that so easily for our children and for the programs that we need, then surely we can take an honest look at our Eugene Police Department budget, see what has actually been accomplished, and recognize that those funds could be used somewhere else in a better way. We, at this point, we need something to change. This is just our town is not doing well. I haven't spoke to anyone that lives in this town that feels good about it, that feels happy with the way that we're going, that feels safe. That's what I have to say. Please consider putting less towards the police department and more towards the programs like Cahoots, like the homelessness issues that we are facing every day. I think that's what's going to help our town. Thank you.
Judith, thank you for that. And at this point, I would ask if anyone else wishes to speak that you raise your virtual hand and I will put you in the queue. Currently, we have nobody else wishing to speak. I'll give it a moment. And I see your hand, Gracie.
Kevin, we've got a sufficient amount of time. If folks that already spoke, if they have other thoughts they'd like to share, we can go ahead and open it up for a second round too.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Michael. So here's a second round for folks who have already spoken, wish to add to their testimony. This is a time to do that now. And our first speaker is Gracie, followed by Matthew. So Gracie, go ahead.
Hello once again. So yeah, I guess something that I really wanted to share with you and that I've shared with the council and that Zondi hit on is that we have been having this conversation and we have as a community been crying out to please defund our police department and please invest in our actual safety and community safety and prevention. And one of my friends, when we were talking to Claire Syrett this summer, said, you know, when the sink is broken, when the faucet's broken, do you grab a wrench or a mop? And the police are the mops, and it doesn't matter how many mops you have, the sink is going to keep leaking. We need to invest in prevention and preventative care and upstream solutions. Creating job programs or a resource center for the homeless people to start working and earning money, building more shelters and huts and like community village. And what I've seen as the council has not responded to these outcries with action and has continued to, provide ad hoc committees and opportunities like this, they feel piecemeal when the message is so clear. The work that needs to be done that the community is screaming for is for less money to go to our police. But I'm seeing youth activists like CORE and lunch people jump into this and do the work that we're asking the city to do themselves. So I just also want to point out that there are amazing organizations in this town that are taking shape without the support of our city to answer these needs that we see in the community. We need to start incentivizing de-escalation. It's really hard when police officers make so much more money than people at Cahoots. Why would a police officer ever want to leave their job? The pay rate, there's such a discrepancy in pay. So we're basically paying someone so much more to carry an assault rifle around. And it isn't because there's necessarily more risk than somebody in Cahoots going to address mental health crisis. I think we need to even out the pay scale and make it very attractive for even police officers to leave their jobs as police and join in with an organization that doesn't hurt people, that isn't rooted in systemic racism. We have this opportunity, this global spotlight because of the Cahoots program to set a revolutionary example of what it means to really look out for the safety of our community. And I think we need to jump on that. And that's all I got.
Gracie, thank you for that. Our next speaker will be Matthew, followed by initials ZZ. So Matthew, go ahead. Matthew, I believe you're muted. Go ahead, Matthew. Matthew, we're having a little trouble hearing you. I'm going to move on to initials ZZ. We'll come back to you, Matthew. So ZZ, go ahead. ZZ, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to speak for once without tremendous time pressure. I want to say that I feel very strongly that some of the money should go towards pilot programs under the Prevention and Homelessness Services umbrella. So, for example, we can
I'm lagging a little bit.
Matthew, I'm going to ask if you could mute yourself while ZZ is talking, please. Thank you. Go ahead, ZZ.
Oh.
Okay, can you hear me again?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. So what I was suggesting is that at least, is this working or I thought I heard Matthew?
Yes, go ahead, ZZ.
Okay, so what I would suggest is that some of the money from EPD be transferred under the umbrella of Prevention and Homelessness Services to run some pilot programs for what would be what is now called the criminal justice system is a criminal punishment system, and that goes for community court too, and I can unpack that a little bit. But so if we have a community justice system that is not about punishment, then we, for example, I think City Council has heard the example that if instead of someone getting pulled over by cops for a broken taillight and given a ticket which to some people is nothing and to other people is exorbitant and it can even be life-changing, they say say, hey, it looks like you're out of a taillight. We have these taillight for you. That is much neater could be. And so that's just one of the smaller examples. We know that the police is rooted in slave patrol history. The example that I just gave is a way in which we can, on a much more minute level, envision what community care, real community safety would look like. For one, that person would drive home with 2 taillights and no big ticket. So that's one thing. Another thing is,
ZZ, I'm sorry, your time is up. We're going to move on to Matthew. Matthew, go ahead. Matthew, I believe you're muted. Matthew, I still can't hear you. Try it now. Okay, Matthew, we're going to come back to you, and we're going to move on to Marty Wilder, followed by Cam. Marty, go ahead.
Hi, yeah. So I want to touch on some things that have already been said about some of the amazing programs that happen in our community that haven't had the support of the city. And in conversations with Cahoots and with other people that have been looking at police policy, there's been this idea that's come up about the city funding and staffing a dispatch call center that organizations within the city could plug into. So if you are an organization that provides job training services to Spanish-speaking people, for example, and somebody hooks in on that crisis line and is struggling, and you have people that are available 24/7 from your organization, they could plug in there. We could get the kind of community to community networking that we need, that the small organizations don't have the overhead to cover right now. The other thing that this could do is that people who call for Cahoots wouldn't have to fear getting the police instead of Cahoots if Cahoots can't respond, because this dispatch would be separate from the police dispatch. And then those people would be first responders. And then a first responder, like Cahoots, for example, if it really is a situation that you need the police, they could call the police as a second responder. So that service could still be available. But we've seen that Cahoots has only had to do that less than 2% of the time with all the calls that they've handled so far. But they would be far more knowledgeable about when something might actually need a police response. So I would seriously urge the city to consider that possibly something that could be funded by the CSI to put together that kind of a service. It would address these goals.
Thank you, Marty. Our next speaker is Cam, and then we're going to give Matthew another try. So Cam, go ahead.
Hello there. Thank you again for the opportunity. I just wanted to get on here again and echo what everybody has been saying. The community does not want to see any of this money go to any more police, the police department, judicial system, criminal justice system. And there's many places that this money can go. We all know that it can go to social services for our homeless, our schools, but I want to touch on something else more like climate change related. There are going to be wildfires this year. There will be homeless people who need smoke centers and shelter. Why are we not paying for housing? It's much cheaper than paying for police. I know that for sure. So I wanted to come on here and make sure that we understand what is going to be happening here. We are going to have fires next year, and we are not going to have anywhere to put people or anything to keep them safe. We're going to have homeless next year. We do not need people with guns showing up to help people who don't have a place to live. That doesn't make people safe. We do not need more police on the streets putting their guns on their hip while passing people of color. This is not making people safe. And that's all I have.
Matthew, thank you. Our next speaker, actually Matthew was the last speaker who's got their hand up. I see now Pamela Kraus. Pamela, I'm going to see if I can get you in the queue here.
I am
There
now
we go.
on my end.
Yes, go ahead, Pamela.
Hi. So our community here is very traumatized. Everybody is traumatized. Some of us are only traumatized seeing most vulnerable people traumatized and run over and traumatized. Everybody here is traumatized. I have been trying to approach this with different ways in the community for quite some time. I would like to see a large investment of funds to trauma care services for everybody in the community who would wish to use them. In relation to that, I want to tell you my two personal events of ever contacting EPD because people had aggressed on me. One time, the downtown walking officer did not want to hear my story when I went to him. I said, come with me, I'll show you what happened where, and he did. And he finally took my story. And then he called me a couple days later and said, oh, we have arrested that person on such and such a charge. If you have any questions, well, I did. This was like totally vulnerable for me. I called and asked my two questions. I never, ever received a call back. Another incident was last summer. A man on LTD intentionally removed his COVID mask and intentionally coughed all over me. He assaulted me. When I calmed down from the assault, because by this time, now there were medical deals, medical costs incurred besides my trauma, I called EPG a few days later and I said, how do I go about filing an assault charge now during COVID? And the dispatch woman said, oh, well, what's it about? And I told her, and she said, oh, we've decided not to deal with that. I said, really? A local police department gets to decide what assault charges they're going to deal with? How did that happen? And she said, our supervisors decided that. On past that, there are many really struggling people working within nonprofit systems. I was witness a week and a half ago to a person I advocate for and have for years, in a vulnerable spot, finally saying, yes, I would like this kind of shelter help.
Pamela, thank you. Your time is up. This looks like it concludes the second round. Michael, I have a question for you, whether you want to go to a third round at this point.
Before we do that, Kevin, I want to make sure we're leaving space for folks that haven't had an opportunity to speak. So I want to pause here and so if you haven't come to the mic and you'd like to, please let us know. We want to make sure that everyone feels like they have space and an opportunity to weigh in.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Michael. I have Eli, who has raised their hand, and Eli has not spoken yet. So Eli, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thanks. The city says our community safety system is stressed, and that's because, like Gracie said, the city is using the wrong tools. In Eugene, the top public calls to police were criminal trespass and illegal camping, both types of calls related to people who are unhoused trying to find a place to sleep or survive. People are calling to complain because they're uncomfortable. There's a difference between safety and comfort. Privileged folks in society have been conditioned to experience discomfort as lack of safety in the body, but it is not. We need to lean into discomfort and learn to differentiate between discomfort and actual lack of safety. Seeing someone who is unhoused, talking to themselves in public, or using drugs in public might make you uncomfortable. Police violence and murder is actual violence and true lack of safety. Racism as a system trains white people to subtly perceive more threat in their body when seeing or interacting with BIPOC. This discomfort of housed white people is misperceived as a threat. And the city of Eugene's current approach of criminalizing homelessness and relying on multiple departments of city staff to harass, police, surveil, misinform, intimidate, banish from parks, and forcefully evict our houseless neighbors in violent, unjust, expensive, counterproductive ways that create insurmountable physical and mental barriers that prevent people from getting off the streets makes no sense. And it actually decreases community safety for both housed and unhoused neighbors. With the largest per capita homeless population in the nation, the mayor talks about intending to address the gaps in our community safety system. Housing is by far the greatest unmet need in our community related to community safety. I would ask that all of the CSI funds currently designated for policing and courts and be reallocated to immediately identify and establish locations on city property where unhoused residents can safely and legally reside in their vehicles and tents during the pandemic and beyond, and be designated for congregate, non-congregate, and alternative shelters, and for transitional housing and for permanent housing that is affordable. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize for probably mispronouncing your name. Apologies, please. Let's see.
Kevin,
I don't see any.
It doesn't look like there's anyone unique in the queue, so let's do a third round, and then we'll wrap up today's session.
Okay, that sounds great, Michael. So first up again in the third round will be initials ZZ. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I thought of a new slogan applicable in Eugene. We don't need more jail beds. We need no jail beds. In fact, we just need real beds. Anyway, I want to go back to saying I remain skeptical of this process because even after all that's been heard acutely in the last couple of months and the sea change that even Mayor Vinny's acknowledges, we still have the rather pathetic framing of what community safety needs and what the gaps are, which are missing the point of missing the mark on what the real needs and gaps are, and framing things again, as I said, like Chief Skinner was about, people who've gone on vacation and noticed some property theft, right? And so and then we have Chief Skinner continuing to talk about, well, what goes on out there isn't really happening in Eugene, but hey, we could still look at ourselves a bit. In fact, EPD killed 3 people of color in 2019. That is 150% the number of homicides that they didn't prevent. And they shot 8 times at Muhsin Sharif, which means it's a miracle that he's not dead. And you know what? They left the alleged victim. I'm not doubting that there was domestic violence going on. I just don't know, right? So it was initially a response to alleged domestic violence call. They leave the alleged victim there, and she is no safer while they chase Muhsin Sharif around town and apparently go roaring up where unhoused people are camped, and they have to run out of the way to avoid the police cars. So the point being, Eugene, first of all, we should not have a wait list at domestic violence shelter at Women's Space, and there should be robust intimate relationship services, violence services, right? That is safety. That is prevention, not shooting 8 times to kill someone's father, right? And yet that's what EPD does, and they stand by it, and then we have our dumb DA standing by it. So I think that Eugene needs to do a comprehensive look at what real safety means, not this call gap bullshit. Thank you. Excuse my language.
Thank you, ZZ. Our next speaker will be Matthew, followed by Pamela. Matthew, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, my apologies about that and the lag from earlier. Especially like I don't really know how to follow up a lot of the great statements made, right? One of my main concerns I was going to try asking about is getting more statistics about what calls came in because of the whole like disproportionate amount of who responded to what and who got what chunk of funding, right? And then it being used like they could only respond to this many calls. Well, like what exactly were those calls? How many of them were there, and how else could they have been addressed? Because we're looking at truly embracing a holistic model of community safety, a new model, then looking at that specifically and getting the numbers, I think would be something I would very much appreciate. And if you could like even post something like that on the website, right? Some of the more detailed information, and like maybe even just a direct cost comparison, right? Again, it's over $500,000 to hire a new officer for just 1 year. That is a lot of money, y'all. And if it doesn't need to go that way, right? Or if we could even look at why it costs that much to hire a new one, I think, you know, if we're gonna give more money out, we need a better accounting of why that is. As folk, I'd like the budget's pretty easy to navigate, but as we're talking about like a regressive payroll tax that most Eugenians would not have voted on, I'd like to get some harder and firmer numbers, especially as we move into more community engagement sessions, especially as we look at the new revenue numbers coming in. And so, yeah, and like definitely, like if it is just for like trespass and like criminalizing homelessness, as we all feel it is, as we all understand it is from most of the complaints coming in, getting those statistics will be a great thing. And I think that's something that y'all could get much easier access to than us as the public. And so like forward, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Our next speaker will be Cam, and Cam will be the last speaker for today's meeting. Cam, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to paint another picture of a world that we could have. So imagine that you see a strange person on the street. Instead of being afraid, terrified to call the police, you have the power and the initiative within you to go up to him and point him to the local social services that do their job correctly, that are funded properly, that can put this person in a home. That is safety in the community, where we can watch ourselves in our streets, point people where they need to go, where they can get the help they need. We do not need people with guns coming into our strangers with guns, because none of them live here. Strangers with guns coming onto our streets and claim they're here to keep the peace. That doesn't sound right to me. What we need is more community engagement and to build the society that we want to see. We need to educate our constituents instead of relying upon an oppressive force such as the police. Through education, we'll find freedom and a prosperous future. And through oppression, we'll have nothing more than violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam. We have one more hand up, and we do have time. So Max Rink, go ahead. And I believe you are muted.
Is that better?
That's much better. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to briefly second all of the comments that I've heard delivered to you by everyone who's spoken on this subject today. I think everyone had great points, and I fully agree. Let's get that money into homeless and prevention services and away from EPD and the courts and the prisons. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. That concludes the list of folks who wanted to speak today.
I think I saw initially, the participant, the first name, is it Wang? Had their
Right.
hand up, and then I saw that removed. I just want to make sure that they didn't want to speak. Is that correct? Wang, did you want to speak?
Yep, got a hand up. Thanks, Michael. So Wang, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Xia. I'm calling in. I want to express about, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So I want to express, I think I talked on the city council meeting in the past about how the racial hate crime happened in Eugene and how this the racial trauma has been caused to the BIPOC community. So I want to use my personal experience. When this happened, I didn't get, I called EPD, but what happened is they just, even nobody show up to assess what's going on. And actually, I think, what for the BIPOC community, we need a resource to have this, the healing services. For example, the social services, what we can support for people to heal from this racial oppression trauma. And also as for EPD, what they're doing is they put, the forces, for example, go to I would say, I don't want to use, but it's kind of like harass, for our homeless community and for our BIPOC community, arrest the people who, for example, gave them ticket when they sit in front of a public library, instead of, really looking at what their needs. So I think the EPD is not really get the resource to help the community instead of, using this resource to harm the community, especially BIPOC community or the hate crime, what the resource need for the people like me, the person of color. So I was I'm just kind of like outside. It's not a very organized, but as my point was expressed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Michael, that's it. Nobody else has indicated that they wish to speak today.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Well, I want to sincerely thank everybody who was here today and those of you that did provide your comments. This is an intense issue, and we appreciate your frankness and honest contributions today. I'd like to point out to everybody in the chat, we have links to the community survey that is and our webpage. And the community survey is available through March, and that's another important tool we're using to collect communities' perspectives on the community safety initiative. So that's another opportunity for you to weigh in, and we encourage you to take advantage of that. And I think with that, that closes our session for today. Thank you very much, everybody.